The exploitation theory disproven. According to the exploitation theory, the capitalist, the one who owns capital, profits from exploiting the worker through surplus value. The capitalist makes the worker sell his labor for less than what it is truly worth. In other terms, the capitalist forces the worker into a wage contract which only pays them a fraction of the value they create, or the worker is forced to work more than the average labor time is of the product he creates. Firstly, this theory is wrong from the perspective of objective costs. The worker only provides the capitalist with one element necessary for the production or creation of goods and services, labor. However, the capitalist or entrepreneur has to pay for the other elements of production, capital and land. The worker merely uses the capital. However, the capital is owned by the entrepreneur, who is responsible for his private property and therefore pays to own and maintain it. He also pays to have ownership over or to rent land. So from a purely objective cost perspective, the exploitation theory is wrong because tools and scarce resources do not grow off the risks of Homo sapiens. They must be claimed, used, and maintained to make new products either with the entrepreneur's own labor or paying someone else for the use of their labor. Labor alone is worthless without the capital and land necessary to produce goods and services. Even if value was objective, which it is not, labor alone cannot be exclusively used to measure how much a product is worth, as other factors go into making the product. Thus, even from an objective value position, the proposition that the worker should get the full value of the product is ridiculous. However, we do not live in a simple world in which value can be objectively measured. Surplus value assumes the value can be objectively measured, hence the word surplus, representing more, over, greater, in relation to something else. Value is how intensely individuals want to receive something, how much they are willing to give up to receive it. Nothing has objective worth. Labor has no inherent value. It only has value if other individuals agree that it does. Every individual is willing to pay different amounts for the same product, or some are not willing to pay anything at all. People want different things, or are willing to pay different amounts for the same thing depending on the location, time, and their current needs or wants. Subjective value applies to every scarce resource or asset, including labor, capital, and land. Thus, surplus value doesn't exist, and the labor theory of value is equally fallacious. Value is not objective and cannot be determined through either labor nor costs. Voluntary transactions can only arise if both sides value what they receive more than what they give away. Thus, voluntary transactions can never be exploitive, including economic exchanges between labor, time, and money. Ultimately, the capitalist is merely a consumer for the worker's labor, and the capitalist himself is a producer of goods and services to consumers. Is the consumer exploited when he buys something on his own free will for $10, or is the capitalist exploited when he sells the same product on his own free will for $10? The answer is that neither of them are exploited, as with all voluntary exchanges both sides benefit. The consumer values the product he receives more than the $10 he gives up, and the capitalist values the $10 he receives more than the product he gives up. Even in a theoretical world, in which land and capital aren't needed to create products and only labor is required, the situation doesn't change at all. If someone pays a worker for creating something, then sells what the worker created to someone else for a greater amount of money, he isn't stealing value from the worker's labor. He facilitates two separate transactions to two different individuals with distinct values. He may have profited in this situation, however the opposite can be true if the worker values his own labor more and thus needs to be paid more for his work, and the other person values his money more and is willing to pay less to receive the product. In this case, the middleman has losses, yet the worker and the consumer both have tangible benefits. The reason the middleman has losses is because he cannot supply the consumer a good enough product that meets his values to exceed the payment of the other exchange between the worker and the middleman, not because he cannot extract value from the worker's labor. A capitalist is necessary to facilitate both the exchange between workers of labor and money and between consumers, goods or services and money. Since these transactions are both different and relate to different economic products and individuals, they cannot be correlated. The capitalist profits if the consumers value what they receive more than the costs to such an extent that the revenue generated exceeds the expenses, purchasing and maintaining all capital equipment along with paying the workers. Profit benefits all. The entrepreneur profits and receives money, so he obviously benefits. The consumers benefit because they receive a product which they value more than the cost and money the consumers give away. The workers benefit as they receive a job, which provides them with a consistent payment, a wage, along with possible benefits that they value more than the time and labor they give away. Thus, just like entrepreneurs or capitalists, consumers and workers are also profit seekers. Profit means that their demands are supplied. Without the profit incentive and the capitalists entering the market to supply consumers with either a good or service, jobs and thus wages wouldn't exist. Jobs are made for a purpose, to supply the demands of others, and are one part of the mechanism to do this. Jobs and wages always come after the incentive of profit or wanting to do something, even if it's a non-for-profit change. If a person never wanted to create something, the job would obviously not exist to create it. Socialists say that wages preceded surplus value and thus profit. No, before wages there was only profit. If your farm wasn't profitable, you would die. Wages are the method of making money without any expenses. You supply another person's values without any costs other than your own work and time. This is when you work on someone's farm, get money, and leave, without having any responsibility for the farm after you left. You are not affected by the condition of the farm and whether it is profitable or not, unlike the guy who owns the farm. Profits always precede wages, and have always preceded wages. Another thing that is not considered by the exploitation theory is time preference, which is the fact that people wish their ends to be achieved sooner rather than later. Just as value, everyone has distinct time preferences. Lower time preference means that individuals would rather temporarily sacrifice their current position for the future, meaning to either defer or delay consumption, save, or improve their production process, and to purchase or transfer resources to the formation of capital goods, investment. This is compared to a higher time preference, which means that an individual wants to receive something as quickly as possible, income to consume rather than to save or invest. Entrepreneurs who put their capital at risk, invest and save, engage with lower time preference either benefit or suffer from their actions, depending on what they invested in, what they are creating for consumers, and how expensive their production process is. Workers engage with a higher time preference as they earn a consistent income without the risks and responsibility of capital ownership while foregoing most of the reward. Interest, the payment of the privilege to borrow money, is also a result of time preference. Goods become less valuable over time, given that individuals prefer a given end to be achieved sooner rather than later. Thus, interest based off time preference is the ratio in the mutual valuation of present goods against future goods. To wrap this video up, the exploitation theory is wrong because labor is not the only factor in production. Capital and land are also required to produce goods, and value is not objective nor can be measured in labor. Since value is not objective and labor is not what determines value, the exploitation theory is null and void. Labor does not have any inherent value, so the same work could have very different worth to different people and thus are willing to pay differently for it. There can be no surplus value profit accumulation made through exploitation of the workers if profit cannot be made merely just through acquiring labor. It is how that labor is utilized. Profit can only be made by supplying the demands of others. The economy is not a zero-sum game. Profit is not made at the expense of the workers. Profit proves that the economy is not a zero-sum game. Everyone benefits, including the workers, as they would only work if they valued the money they received of being of higher value than the work and time they put in. The exploitation theory was a theory made to explain the origin of profit. We can safely conclude that it analyzed profit, labor, and value incorrectly. It is a false theory. Now, any sort of argument going back to this, that workers are exploited to make a profit, is a moral argument and not an economic argument. It is time to let the socialist fallacies go.